What's up, y'all? It's Carla, aka Cla the Poet, and this is a survivor blog sharing my truth about my experience with DV and child abuse, as well as family violence. So, I grew up in a house where my dad was a drug addict and an alcoholic. And he would come home drunk, he would come home high, and he would get into fights and altercations with my mother. They had a very, very volatile relationship. It was kind of like fire and gasoline. And they would argue back and forth, and so he would get violent with her. I saw him choking her. I saw him assaulting her. I saw him pushing her against walls. I saw him, hitting her. And, these fights between them sometimes happened in my room, sometimes happened in the kitchen, sometimes happened in different parts of the house. And so I grew up seeing it. And when my dad was high and drunk, he would want me to watch. And a lot of times he would tell me I needed to get my ass over here. And my mother would tell me to go downstairs, with my grandmother, because at the time we were living with her. And so a lot of times I would sit in the middle of the stairs because my parents would be fighting, physically, violently fighting, and I didn't know where to go. And that's one of my childhood memories. So, I grew up seeing that type of dynamic and experiencing it. And my father would say, what goes on in this house stays in this house. Meaning that, you're not supposed to say nothing to nobody. You keep your mouth shut. And so, growing up, when things were happening, under the threat of either getting beatings or getting in trouble, I would be scared and, I would just keep my mouth shut. I never really spoke about what I was going through. And, eventually it started affecting me when I got older. So eventually my parents got a divorce, and my father got court-ordered visits. And so we would visit him every 2 weekends, and he would get us for a couple of weeks in the summer. And so eventually what ended up happening was we would visit him on the weekends, and he eventually got clean. He went to NA, he went to AA, but he never went to anger management. And so his angry temper, it didn't change. And he was a military guy. He had served in the military, and he was very, very disciplinarian. And basically, it had to be his way or the highway. He was just that type of old school, type of rough guy. And so, my sister was eventually born, and we would go visit him every 2 weeks. And if he came home in one of his moods, we would catch it. We would have to watch it, because if we upset him too much, we would get slapped, we would get beatings or whatever, and sometimes stuff thrown at me and stuff like that. And as I grew up and I became a teenager, how teenagers become rebellious. So eventually I started talking back. I started challenging him. He was upset because of the divorce between him and my mother, and he would be calling her a bitch and saying all this stuff. And I would be defending my mom, and I would be getting backhanded when I would defend my mother. And so it was that type of dynamic, that I grew up in. And it ended up affecting me. I started having panic attacks. I went through teenage depression. I had to go to a counselor. And sometimes I had nightmares. What they call PTSD is what I started going through early when I was a teenager and eventually as an adult. And so when you go through all of these different things, right, all these different traumas, and you go through these experiences, it affects who you are, and it affects how you operate, if you're not careful. And that's what ended up happening to me. So I ended up having to go to therapy, and I ended up, thinking that certain behaviors were normalized, right? And so when I got older and I started dating, I started dating guys that were kind of like my dad, like violent, rough, hood dudes, if you want to label it hood dudes. I had boyfriends that had prison records. One guy, I think he might have been in the gang. I don't remember exactly, but ended up dating dudes that were similar to my dad. You know, not even realizing that it's probably my traumas affecting like the choices that I was making. But of course, I didn't know that. Eventually, I evolved as a woman, and I know that that's not the right type of person to date. But when you're younger, you know, you're not thinking about all that, right? So I ended up, when I got to college, I met my ex husband, and I tried to date someone who wasn't hood, and my ex husband wasn't hood. He was a guy who was in college, who was a security guard, and he was from the suburbs. So I figured that he was safe. You know, I figured, okay, you know, this is an educated brother. He's going to school. He has a job. He's, you know, going someplace. He has something about himself. He don't have no prison record or anything like that. And boy, was I wrong, because after we had a long engagement, you know, we dated for about a couple of years and then we got married. But the moment that we got married and I got pregnant, it was like a 180-degree turn, right? It's like he treated me real good for a couple of years, but once, you know, he lost his job and we started going through stress and I got pregnant, it was like, he turned into somebody else, started calling me names, started like blaming me, you know, for everything that was going wrong in his life. So if he lost his job, it's because he married me. And I was the reason for everything. Every problem, anything that came up, I was the reason for it. And when he found out I was pregnant, he told me that he hoped something happened to me and my kid, right? So that was really, really hurtful. So I ended up finding out that he had anger issues. He punched a hole through the wall. And, you know, there's times when he pushed me against the wall, got in my face. There's time, you know, I got hit and stuff like that. And eventually, I started going to a domestic violence agency called Safe Horizons, started getting counseling, started filing police reports, and I eventually filed for divorce. But he started talking about killing me. So I ended up having to go to a domestic violence shelter. And we had had 2 kids by then. So I ended up having to live in hiding for a while. And eventually I came out of that program and I came out of it. Me and my kids, you know, we ended up settling in Brooklyn. We went through the program and we went through a whole bunch of systems and stuff like that. But, you know, I'm grateful for what I have. But when I think back, you know, just to all the things that I went through that got me here and that got me to this point, it's really deep, you know. And all of these things I'm realizing have affected me. You know, I have a lot of rough edges. It's hard for me to trust people and stuff like that because of all the stuff I've gone through. And so, you know, therapy is really, really helpful. I'm a big proponent of therapy. I'm going to therapy. I'm still go to therapy. And every once in a while, I talk to a domestic violence advocate. And yeah, I'm just, you know, thinking back to everything I survived is what gives me the motivation to keep moving forward, to keep going, to have consistency, to want to improve my life, you know, to be better than I ever was, and to try to give my children a safe and healthy, you know, upbringing in an environment, you know, to give them something I never had as a kid. But those are just some of the things that I endured and that I went through. And, you know, this is just, like I said, a reminder of how far I've come so that I continue to move forward and to stay on the path of progression, because to me, progression is very important. So anyway, this was just me sharing a little bit of my story and everything that I've endured, and I hope that someone is inspired by it. And, you know, we are a voice in this world, and we should speak our truth. Okay? Peace.